Good morning. Sue kind of explained why I'm standing here today, but there's a little more to the story. A couple of years ago, I did this one other time, and those of you who were here that day were so kind to me that I resolved that I should quit when I was ahead. Never, ever do it again. And I stuck to that resolve until a week ago Tuesday, when it played out just like Sue said. Pastor looked me in the eye and said, "Would you do this, Mike?" And while I was trying to figure out how to say no, we saw that it was Michael and all angels, and I looked around the table and said, uh-oh. I mean, there can't be a clearer sign than that. So here I am. Having said that, please understand, I'm just a guy. I'm not authorized to preach. And so don't take anything I say today as preaching. Neither Pastor Lynn nor the ELCA knows what I'm about to say, and frankly, I'm not sure what I'm about to say either. So if I say anything that offends you or bothers you, please don't blame them, blame me. Here's the gist of what I hope to say today. We need angels. They may appear at any time with no warning. We might be happier if we notice them, but we'll be rewarded either way. So the bulletin cover says the Feast of Michael and All Angels. Actually, it just says Michael and All Angels, but it is an official church feast day. The traditional name is Michaelmas. Michaelmas falls on the 29th of September each and every year. So that means that maybe once in 7 years it falls on a Sunday. Christmas is the same way. We celebrate Christmas whether it's Sunday or not. Michaelmas just goes on by. So that tells you something about the relative stature of those days, which is appropriate. Some years when Michaelmas falls on Sunday, we still ignore it. And honestly, we might have ignored it again this year had it not been for the strange circumstances. I got to choose, and I chose Michaelmas. The 29th of September is one of the quarter days of the financial year, traditionally. The day when the banks close out their books for the quarter and open their books for the next quarter. So you could say it's a Christian feast day and a financial feast day. It's also celebrated in some places as the beginning of autumn. Like in Scotland, they have a Highland Games on Michaelmas every year. And in some small towns and villages, they have like a hiring fair and hire the harvest labor on Michaelmas. So who is Michael that we're celebrating here? Well, you heard in Revelation, he's the greatest of all the archangels, and he's honored for defeating Satan in the war of heaven. The name Michael literally means who is like God. Some sort of Christian folks, like Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses, hold that Michael is Jesus before the incarnation. And some sects even think he is like God. But we Lutherans aren't that. No, he's just an archangel. He is not Jesus and he is not God. Having said that, though, he's an archangel not just in Christianity, but also in Judaism and Islam. He appears 3 times in the Old Testament, twice in the New Testament, and once in the Quran. So he does have special status. Now, a bit about angels. Back in March, I actually wrote a little, one of my Echoes back page was on the subject of angels. I did that because the Old Testament lesson the previous month included a bit from Isaiah where the 7-winged seraph was mentioned. Well, I had no idea what a seraph was, so I did a little research, and that grew into a little more research on angels in general, and I poured just a tiny bit of what I'd learned into that one page to share with anybody who cared to read it. So one thing is that, we recite the creed every week, restating the church's teaching about what we as Lutherans are to believe. And there's nothing in the Creed about angels. Does that mean that we don't necessarily have to believe in angels? I mean, you could argue that way, and honestly, they're sort of a cyclic thing, and sometimes angels aren't mentioned much in the church. However, they are mentioned 600 times in the Bible. Some of the places where they're mentioned, they aren't really called angels, but you can tell from the context that that's really what we're talking about. Many of the times they're mentioned, they're in dreams or visions. Many times they aren't particularly recognized until maybe even after the fact. And other times they're sort of mentioned in an offhand, casual way, like everybody knows there's angels, you know. A lot of what we hear about angels is clearly myth. Now, when I say that, there's nothing derogatory about that. I believe in the power of myth. I believe that myth holds the greater truth beyond facts. Facts appear to our rational mind, but myth talks to our spirit, our soul. So saying it's myth is not a bad thing. However, having said that, there's a lot of myth about angels that it's just not right. For instance, in the Christmas cards, you see cherubs as little baby angels with little bitty cute wings. The Bible describes cherubim as having 4 feet. They look something like a sphinx. They're carved into the ark of the tabernacle to protect it from evil. They're not baby angels. Another, like in popular music, the girl gets hit by a train and becomes an angel. There's nothing scriptural about that. You're not going to become an angel when you die. I hope you weren't expecting that. Angels and humans are of a different order of creation. Now, sitting out there today, there may be an angel. One of you may be an angel. And if you are an angel, you're not going to become a human someday, and the rest of us are not going to become angels someday. Another thing, every Christmas, Jimmy Stewart, we have to see that movie, right? Angels don't earn their wings. Sorry, I mean, that makes for a nice story, but no. And in fact, most angels probably don't have wings at all. They can fly, sure, but you don't need wings to fly, not when you're a spirit being, as angels are. So, where did all this mythology come from? One thing is that there's a lot of Jewish scripture that we Christians don't really see. We see what's captured in our Old Testament, but there's other stuff. There's the Midrash. There's a thing called the Book of Enoch, which was very popular at the time of Christ, and it's pretty clear that Jesus actually probably studied the Book of Enoch. There's also the Qumran scrolls, sometimes called the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there's a lot of stuff about angels and all of that. And some of our angel concepts probably came from that literature. Clearly, the writers of our scripture were familiar with that scripture. But one thing that troubled me back in March and troubles me still today is this detailed hierarchy that the Catholics especially talk about. There's 9 classes of angels separated into 3 orders, and they all have proper names. Angels are actually at the bottom of the list of angels, and archangels are second from the bottom. Seraphim are at the top, interestingly. I never found any place where that came from. It was almost like it was invented out of whole cloth in medieval times. However, I will say that Paul's letter to the Ephesians mentions rule and authority, power and dominion. And his letter to the Colossians mentions thrones or powers or rulers or authority. Well, it turns out those are all names that are names of these classes of angels. So, having said that, I guess you can deduce that Paul probably was aware of this hierarchy and felt like his listeners, his readers all knew about it, and so he didn't have to explain it. Today's lessons. Daniel is a really interesting book. It's the apocryphal book in the Old Testament, like Revelation in the New Testament. It tells about the end times. It describes, like Revelations, the end times as being trial and tribulation followed by triumph and peace. So there's a connection there between the Old and New Testament. And the people that put together our lectionary like to do that for us. They like to put things together in the readings that do tie together somehow. The reason we read it today, of course, is because the angel Gabriel came to Daniel and told him that Michael had been appointed as Israel's archangel. His job was to bring messages to Israel and to protect Israel. A close reading of that lesson today shows us, however, that there are other archangels appointed to other nations. And there apparently are 70 in all. There's that number 70. The 70 apostles, the 70 archangels appointed to protect the nations of the world. However, Israel being the chosen people, they got the best. Michael is the top-notch archangel, and he's guaranteed to take down the other archangels if they ever come into conflict, which Daniel's told they almost certainly will. The psalm today sort of offhandedly mentions angels as glorifying God, as we do. And I think that sort of underscores the message that angels are less than God, but they're more than man. And even though they're more than man, they worship God just as we do. In the book of Revelation, we hear the story of Michael defeating Satan. And that's the reason, of course, that we read that today when we're honoring Michael. In Luke, Jesus tells the apostles that he saw that fall. And that would be the principal reason, again, for including that in the lectionary for today. But, of course, the real message of that gospel was what he hammered the apostles over the head with. It's not what you do for God, but what God does for you. That's the reason you should be rejoicing. Back to angels. They have jobs according to the Scripture. The principal job is to be messengers to mankind. And in fact, the word angel means literally messenger. Some examples of that, when Abraham went out into the desert to slay his son Isaac because God told him to, it was an angel who ordered him to stop. And Zechariah learned that his elderly wife was going to bear a son to be named John by the angel Gabriel as acting as a messenger. Mary learned of the birth of Jesus through the messenger Gabriel. The revelation to John, the book of Revelation, according to the first chapter, was dictated by an unnamed angel. The entire book of Zechariah in the Old Testament similarly was an angel delivering a message to the prophet. Second role of angels is to protect and assist the faithful, either individually or collectively. And by the way, the Bible does say there are guardian angels. Jesus tells us that every child is assigned an angel. And I hope they don't go away when we grow up. I think they're still there. Revelations, in the beginning, talks about the angels protecting the earth. Lots of Psalms talk about that. There's a story in Genesis about the city of Sodom where Lot is warned to get out of Dodge by a couple of angels. They fed Elijah in the desert when he was dying of hunger and thirst. There's a couple other stories in the book of Daniel that are really cool stories. There's the one where Daniel's thrown into the lion's den, and there's a story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fiery furnace. And in both cases, they are protected and rescued by angels. In fact, the angel that appears in the fiery furnace so frightens the king that he immediately relents and tells him to haul him out of there. There's also when Jesus is tempted by the devil in the desert and finally says no for the last time, angels show up to protect him at that point. Wish they could have been there earlier, maybe. So they also rolled the stone from the tomb and rescued Peter from prison a couple of times, according to the book of Acts. Well, that's all good, but there's also a dark side, as you know, to angels. They rescued Lot, but they punished the sinful mob in the city of Sodom. In Egypt, they killed the firstborn of all the Egyptians. under God's command. Revelations tells us that the bad angels are going to damage earth at the end of time. Samuel talks about angels bringing a pestilence on all of Israel. And also in Acts we learned that an angel killed Herod for his sinful activities. Now the appearance of angels varies. Oftentimes in the Bible stories they appear just like men, and the people that meet them don't even know they're angels until later. Other times they appear quite spectacularly, and there's just no question about it. So like Abraham entertained 3 men, and they didn't know they were angels until they informed him that Sarah was going to have a baby. The men of Sodom thought the 2 angels looked like men until they got fire rained down on them. A man wrestled with Jacob all night, and until he named him Israel, Jacob had no idea that it was an angel. Gabriel in the book of Daniel, the story we read today, appears as an ordinary man. Then later on, at the empty tomb, there are 2 men in dazzling clothes that greet the women at the empty tomb. There's a mountaintop experience in Daniel where they're described as like lightning with clothing white as snow. In Revelations, the armies of heaven wear fine, white, pure linen. And then the fiery furnace story in Daniel, we hear that the angel appears like a god. In Luke, the shepherds are told about Jesus by an angel who shines with the glory of God. So I've given you a lot of sort of random information here, and I also alerted you at the beginning that you're not necessarily required to believe all of this. However, I know there are several out there among you who are convinced that you have been visited by an angel at one or more times in your life. And for the rest of you, I got to ask you this question. How do you know you haven't been visited? A lot of times they don't make it obvious. And I repeat that there may be an angel among us this very morning. And I also want to repeat that Jesus told us there's an angel assigned to each and every one of us. Okay, I'm going to wrap up now, but I want to tell you what Martin Luther said about this. And I'm going to read this. We Christians should have the sure knowledge that the princes of heaven are with us, not only 1 or 2, but a large number of them. And if we were without this custody, and God did not in this way check the fury of Satan, we could not live for one moment. We need angels. They may appear at any time with no prior warning. We will be happier if we notice them, but we will be rewarded nonetheless. Amen.